Kia ora, if I've got that right. Thanks very much. I just wanted to, before I start, I just got an email this morning about the International Children's Peace Prize. Don't know if you've seen about that, but it's awarded annually to a child whose courageous or otherwise extraordinary efforts have made an impact on behalf of the rights of the child. I'm just wondering if, as a conference, we might be willing to nominate Madison for that prize. Yeah, okay. Cool. Job done. Excellent. Thank you. According to the time, I'm nearly finished, so that should make the job a lot easier. Thank you very much. Okay, I can't believe it's the last day of the conference. It's gone really, really quickly, and it's been so full, and it's been fascinating to listen to people commenting about the fact that most of us have to spend time giving talks convincing other people that this is an important issue. But we're in a room where everybody already knows that. So that's I've had to rewrite my talk about 3 times just trying to compensate for that. And it's also been interesting hearing people who are surprised when people turn up to their talks because they're used to having a handful of people in the audience as opposed to 40 people packing into a room. So that's really exciting. And thanks so much again to Liz and to Verna and to all at Pillars for organizing this, because it has been incredibly important and incredibly special. So just to tell you a wee bit about our work at Families Outside, we're a national Scottish charity that works entirely to support children and families affected by imprisonment. That's all we do. We're not part of a larger organisation. And we do that in 3 main ways. So we provide direct support to families. We have a national helpline, but we also have face-to-face support available in people's communities so they can have that more in-depth support. And that includes providing information to families, writing publications. I think some of you already picked up a copy of a booklet that we have for children, which is helping them understand their feelings about a parent's imprisonment. I've also got, I think these are all gone. I set some out this morning and they're all gone. But this is the one I'll be talking about today, is information for families when someone is convicted of sexual offence. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that. It's interesting, at Families Outside, we talk about how we define families, and our definition of families is very broad. But it was interesting hearing Anne Adler-Stestrin talking about this kind of description of families as dysfunctional and so on, and that reminds me of a definition we really like to use as a novelist named Mary Carr, who wrote a book called The Liars Club, and she describes a dysfunctional family as any family with more than one person in it. And I think that really works out very well for our definition as well. So we provide direct support to families, but we also provide training to professionals, and we couldn't do our job without the collaboration, working alongside other professionals who are bigger than we are and have that more regular face-to-face contact. So we provide training to prison staff, we provide training to teachers, we provide training to health professionals, to social work teams, basically anybody who will listen to what we've got to say about why the impact of imprisonment is so important in terms of their own work. We also spend, the 3rd branch of our work is on campaigning and training, I suppose preparing for changes to policy and practice, because people won't actually know what they need to change until they're aware about what this means for families who've been through this experience. I'm also Secretary General of Children of Prisoners Europe. COPE is a network, a European network of about 35 different countries that collaborate and work together, similar to what we were talking about this morning in terms of what INSIP plans to do, I think, but it's learning from each other, it's collaborating with each other, and it's campaigning on shared issues, particularly in relation to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. So it's been a huge honor to work with COPE, very, very energizing to be working alongside people who know what you're talking about, who know what you're working for, and really can give ideas and suggestions about how to get there. So this talk is on behalf of COPE as well. The topic that I'm talking about is specifically on the experience of families when someone is sent to prison for a sexual offence. A lot of people have asked about the work that we're doing in schools, specifically to support teachers, and I've mentioned that in a few of the workshops, but we presented on this in Texas last year. We're presenting it on again at the COPE conference in May. So maybe the next INSIP, that's something we can bring in and talk about. But what's interesting is how similar this topic is in terms of providing information both to the families themselves but to professionals who are working with them. It's not about giving professionals an extra task or an extra responsibility, but it's about providing them with the tools to deal with something they're already facing. So that's something that's absolutely critical. And in fact, we were doing some workshops in schools a couple of years ago, and we were doing 10 back-to-back workshops with the students and the teachers together. And one of the days, every single workshop we did had at least one child in that class who had a family member in prison. So it just really revealed how prevalent the problem was, even in a country that doesn't have as high a population as some of the others that are here today. So, yes. Okay, no hobbits have been harmed in the making of this PowerPoint. The resource we've developed is called Picking Up the Pieces. I want to apologize to my colleagues from Ireland, who apparently the Irish Penal Reform Trust wrote a report called Picking Up the Pieces in 2012. Didn't know that, so it's unfortunate there are two publications of the same title. If you happen to Google it, there are plenty of pieces for us all to pick up, though, so I'm sure it'll be fine. But we wrote this along with families. There were so many families coming to us, both through the helpline and through face-to-face support, who were struggling with this issue, and it was... we provide support to families regardless of what their context is, regardless of what their personal story is, but there were many, many similar themes in terms of our general support to families. They face many of the same issues in terms of impact on income, in terms of impact on housing, health and mental health, the targeting, that might be targeted or victimized because of stories in the press. You might see a drop in a child's school performance, a drop in children attending school, difficulties maintaining contact due to distance, due to travel and transport, due to family breakdown. But underlying all of this is stigma. And that's the stigma that actually prevents people from seeking support for all the issues that they're dealing with as a consequence of someone going to prison. And when you're talking about stigma, we don't see it any greater than we see it with families when someone's been convicted of a sexual offense. It's actually layer upon layer upon layer of stigma. And in fact, we run a support and arts collective of young people aged 16 to 25 called KIN, which is specifically for young people who've had a family member go to prison. And we asked them what their priority was, what was their main interest in terms of what support they wanted, what information they wanted, but they didn't want websites or leaflets or, the face-to-face support was helpful, but what they really wanted was a means of addressing the stigma that was attached to that, so they couldn't even talk about it, they couldn't even tell their friends, they couldn't get the informal supports that are so important to all of us, let alone seek more formal support. So what they talk about in their work is that the imprisonment of a family member is a question that demands a response. So it's worth looking at the work that they're doing as well. I'm hoping that we can get Ken to come to one of these events at some point in future, because they're really doing some amazing work and supporting each other as much as anything. So when you think about how much greater the stigma is when it's a sexual offense involved, there is a hierarchy amongst people in prison about offense type. So someone who's committed an armed robbery has a greater status than someone who's committed an offense, a sexual offense who has greater status than someone who's committed a sexual offense against a child. It sort of goes on and on. And we're seeing that amongst families as well. And it's really horrible, because you'd think that you want people to be all supporting each other. But if you've read Rachel Condry's work, she wrote a book called Aftermath, which is about a support group that families set up where the families were experiencing imprisonment when someone had been convicted of a very serious offense, usually sexual offense or violent offense. And what happened, the divisions that the families themselves created within that was so destructive that the group totally disintegrated after a few years. And it was really, really heartbreaking to see, because it was such an important support, but there was still that infighting twice. That infighting that really divided families when we really need desperately to be working alongside each other. And the stigma shows through in the support that's available for families who are in this situation. So before we started this work, we actually commissioned some research to find out what support was actually available for families in this situation. And there was plenty of support if your family was the victim of the offense. There was plenty of support if you were the victim yourself. There were counseling programs and sexual offense programs for the perpetrator, but we found nothing where you're a family member of someone who's been convicted of a sexual offense generally, and your family wasn't involved in the offense itself. There was nothing. And we looked broadly internationally as well, and really found there was one organization that provided a group program for families of people who'd committed an internet sex offense. That was the only thing we could find. So it was such a hidden group, and even the families that we were supporting often wanted to keep that very anonymous. They would work with us by telephone, but didn't really want to come in and meet with us directly or to meet with other people. Meanwhile, we're seeing really dramatic increases in the levels of sexual offending that's being detected and convicted. So we're seeing improvements in detection and in DNA in terms of forensics and so on, but also a general shift in how crimes are committed, not just sexual offending, but crimes in general. We're seeing a lot more crimes moving to the internet rather than street crime. So we're seeing really massive shift here. And we're also seeing families, because we're looking at a shift in, I suppose, the more traditional types of offences, we're seeing a shift in the families that are being affected by this. So we're seeing a lot more movement towards families who don't necessarily have much experience in dealing with the criminal justice system. So that's been an interesting shift as well. But we were seeing a real rise in the contacts that we were getting from families asking about this. So we see a number of issues that families in this situation face that are less common than in other types of offending. So first of all, you see the conspiracy of silence. And this is something that you do see with other types of offending in general. However, you could argue this is even more so when it comes to a sexual offence. The family may have witnessed it. They may have been victims themselves and therefore groomed that, this is our secret. They're even less likely to be told why daddy has gone to prison, and even more fear and pressure to talk about this in later life. And I think Adele's story yesterday shared that with us very, very powerfully. This is something that you keep buried for years. So it's this real fear about sharing that and what that might mean. You also get families who are asked to testify. And real divided loyalties on the back of that. Even if you're a victim, you can really feel guilty about you being the one responsible for breaking up the family. If you hadn't said anything, then everything would still be okay. There's a real conflict, I think, internally, especially with younger children. One of the family members for the booklet, we said, I still love him, but I hate him as well, and I can't tell anyone I still love him. You can't make feelings just go away. So it's a real, I don't even know how to find the words for it, but a real difficulty in trying to reconcile that individually and with other people. It's also a really common theme for families to believe in the innocence of the person who is being, that's why we talk about family members convicted of sexual offence, because family members often really don't want to believe that it's happened. So there might not be any previous involvement in the justice system, but there's also incredible pressure on the whole family and on kids in particular to try to find ways of making things better, finding ways to reconcile the person they thought they knew with the person who's now in prison. So real strain there. And it's also the fact this is a very public offence. So raid might be very public, and it's quite obvious when you're talking about publicity, talking about the neighbours, when people are taking lots of computers and things out of the house, you can draw all sorts of conclusions from that. And it's not just one computer that's being taken, it's the entire family. Everything is just completely lifted from the home. We had a contact from a young girl who was just about to sit her exams, and the police had all of her computer equipment, everything she needed to prepare for her exams had all been taken away. But you also see the situation where the whole family might be arrested and questioned and accused, because it's difficult to pin down who's actually the guilty person. And this is in relation to internet offending, but it's something that's very, very powerful. I have a statement here from a lady talking about what happened with her family. I'll read excerpts from it. It's a very long statement, but just to give you a flavour. Said about the doorbell was ringing persistently. It was about 7 a.m. When I came downstairs, our hall was crowded with people, one with a battering ram. They introduced themselves as police and explained they had a search warrant. I was confused and sure there had been a mistake. Said of course they could do their job, and I even offered to make tea. They started to search through the house, and I started to wipe clean work surfaces in the kitchen and offered to make more tea, because cleaning is what I do when I'm worried. I asked an officer how often mistakes are made, and he says I've never known it to happen. Some more police arrived. One went around the house opening cupboards and drawers and taking photographs. We were all asked to sit down, and 2 officers stated that indecent images had been found on one of the computers. They read a statement, and I agreed that I understood, but the truth was I was horrified, in the true sense of the word, and too stunned to take in what was happening. Who had been in the house on the day that they said? That was the 10th of March was the last day the obscene images had been accessed. It had been Mother's Day, and my husband and son had been with me at home making a dinner for me. Who would commit such a heinous crime in my home on Mother's Day? At this stage, I couldn't believe a family member was capable of such a thing. And she goes on to talk about how it was surreal and the whole family was taken to the police station, and that she'd been offered water, but she was afraid to take it because she didn't want anyone to have to escort her to the toilet. My son was in the cell next to the one, and I'd been awaiting his lawyer, and he was still to make a statement. At 7 p.m. I was released, given my shoes and clothes and signed for, but I was told to wait for my police at the front desk. He emerged looking completely traumatized. I'd not seen him cry since he was a child. We fell into each other's arms weeping. At that point, one of the officers kindly moved us out of the public view. At the time, I was relieved to go home, but on reflection, I wish my son could have been spared that ordeal. He will have been scarred permanently. Not only did he have to learn that the father he loved had committed such a crime, and he was a good father, despite what he'd done, but also that my son had been subjected to an appalling incident at work where the police had turned up at his work and taken him away, escorted him off the premises. He was taken to his flat and his laptop seized and driven to another city. My boy, why did this have to happen to you when you've never caused anyone any suffering in your life? My son worried about the reaction from people at his work and was petrified that it would affect his career prospects. Since that awful day, I know I can expect the police or social work to call at any time unannounced. I can no longer relax in my own home. Yet there is no communication between my son and his father. My younger son lives abroad and had to hear of the crime over the phone. He had been mature and charitable towards his father, but was nevertheless horrified to learn about this with no family around him. Normally, Christmas would be a real family time. Last year, there were no decorations, cards, nor family dinner. I spent Christmas alone in my son's flat. I can't seek help from my GPs. He's a family friend. I can't seek help from my friends, so I don't want them to know. There must be many, many more women and children in a similar position suffering in silence because of the taboo surrounding this offense and the fear of the effect on their family and their family's reputation. The family feels ashamed, and as a wife, dreadful guilt despite your head telling you it's not your fault. Why did I not see this coming and do something to prevent it happening? Where did I go wrong as a wife? So incredibly powerful statement from her, and this is again something that was fairly common from a number of people. Another lady here talking about how both her daughter and son were arrested alongside herself and her husband as well. So it's something that the whole family experiences that until it's actually narrowed down. So there's, again, something that visibly affects the entire family, not just about one person being taken away. There's the additional challenge as well about family contact after the offense, after someone's gone to prison. And you do get a real division in families, disagreement about whether the person is guilty. You get disagreement about whether to maintain that contact. As you heard in that previous story, the wife maintained contact with her husband, but the son didn't want anything to do with him. And when children are younger, it can have obviously an impact on whether kids are actually going to have someone to take them to the prison to visit. We also see assumptions within social work teams, and most of our relations with social work are excellent. They're incredibly supportive, and we really value the discussion and the support that we have with them. However, we also see two extremes within that. We get an extreme of an assumption that someone who goes to prison, but particularly for someone who goes to prison for a sexual offense, is a bad person, therefore they should have no contact with their kids, regardless of whether the kids had anything to do with the offense. So we get that assumption. But we also get the opposite extreme, which is really, really interesting, where the assumption is that if a child were on the child protection register, where they had been a victim or they had been abused, that now the person's in prison, that the child is safe. So they take the child off the child protection register, but that means if they're taken to a prison to visit, the prison staff don't know that there's an issue and a reason to need to keep the child safe. So it's a really interesting situation where you get, one is no contact, one is everything's fine now, and neither one is really the correct assumption. It's just needing to have that conversation and making sure that the communication to make sure that the best interest of the child is really being protected. So the booklet that we produced, you can get additional copies. It's available to download from our website. It was actually quite strange. We didn't actually make very many of these because we didn't realize there'd be quite such a demand for them, but we've had to reprint twice. Again, you're welcome to contact us if you want hard copies sent to you, but you can download it for free. So the booklet pulls together the range of feelings that families experience and ways of coping with these, including ways of talking to children. We do give some detail about the legal implications, but not as much, because we do have separate materials that talk about things like a sex offender register and what that actually means for the families. But the duration of the legal implications of a sexual offence is another key difference here, as placement on a sex offender register can place restrictions on someone for life. And that there will be variation, there will be different countries that had to have different regulations for that, but that's fairly common. We see in a lot of jurisdictions is that once someone has committed a sexual offence or been convicted of a sexual offence, you are labelled for life. You might be part of some sort of notification law as well, where people need to know where you live, or you have to declare it when you're applying for a job, and it can really make a whole difference on not only that individual, but on the entire family, in terms of whether you have a future, whether you have an income, whether you can live without being targeted. And there's often a lack of communication with the family about this. So, for example, we were working with a lady who was standing by her husband and was willing to support him on his release from prison. He wasn't going to be allowed to live in the area where he had lived before because of the where the offence was committed. So she was willing to sell the house, to move to a different area, to set up home somewhere else, based on the conditions that were going to be placed on him. But the policy was that you discuss where someone is going to live 6 weeks prior to release, and no one was willing to talk about it with her until that time. So in terms of uprooting of families, moving a house, selling a house, buying another one, 6 weeks is really giving you enough time to make that quite life-changing shift. So it's just making sure that families are kept involved, kept informed, and really are part of the picture, rather than the focus just on the one person. So the booklet really seemed to strike a chord. It's been translated, I don't know why, but into Norwegian, Finnish, and Swedish so far. Scandinavians really seem to like this book. But it is something that is still a very, very hidden issue. We still need to find ways of not only addressing the stigma of families in general, but especially just addressing the stigma of families where, again, people are being punished and judged and targeted for something they didn't do. I don't know if you're aware of Children of Prisoners Europe has an annual campaign called Not My Crime, Still My Sentence. It's every June, and they have some really good materials and things. It's worth going to the COPE website to look at those as well. And it's a key theme for all of us. Now, I am dashing off. I'm about to go over to Tasmania to talk about all this again. But you can go to our website for more information, lots of resources there. As I said, I've left a few copies of the booklets. You can fight each other for them. But I do want to finish by returning to the issue of stigma, because this is absolutely critical for all of us. So I've got a very, very short video that I want to end with. It's my absolute favorite video. It was free to make. We've heard a lot about resources here. You don't have to spend a lot of money to make a difference. Helps, but it's not absolutely essential. So I just wanted to share this. Some of you will have seen it before, but I love it. And I think it really summarizes what we've been talking about throughout the whole conference. So I will leave you with that, hopefully.
I'm going to end up in prison too, just because my dad's there. You're wrong if you think there are other possibilities for me. I know a criminal breeds a criminal. It's not true. There's good in everyone. My dad's a bad person. Don't think that it could be different for me. That's where I'm going. Doing well at school, finding a good job, that's not important to me. Being in a gang, getting into fights is what matters. Listening to me, you should just write me off. And don't ever believe I want to succeed. I've dropped out. I'm out of reach. Don't assume that I can become anything. You see, the script of my life has already been written. Don't dare to say there's still hope for me. If things were done differently, there could be potential. It's over. Unless you reverse your thinking, totally turn around how you see me, and don't believe it's over. There could be potential if things were done differently. There's still hope for me. Don't dare to say the script of my life has already been written. You see, I can become anything. Don't assume that I've dropped out. I'm out of reach. I want to succeed. And don't ever believe you should just write me off. Listening to me is what matters. Getting into fights, being in a gang, that's not important to me. Finding a good job, doing well at school, that's where I'm going. It could be different for me. Don't think that my dad's a bad person. There's good in everyone. It's not true a criminal breeds a criminal. I know there are other possibilities for me. You're wrong if you think just because my dad's there, I'm going to end up in prison too.